welcome to the green room again. A new role for me as presenter on this occasion, interviewing Jem Southam, talk about his talk that he's just given to the conference. Welcome, Jem. I was fascinated by your talk because for me it's a very different approach to photography from the one that I take. You work very much with series, and although I produce what I like to think of an accidental series in that I have concerns that repeat. Your whole kind of structure is very much about having a deliberate concept. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting where that comes from. I've often wondered where it comes from and why it happens. But I often I would love to be able to make pieces of work that lasted 2 or 3 pictures. It's fairly exhausting making these big pieces of work. You know, when you know you've started on something, you've got years and years. But there's something absolutely fascinating about. I talked in the talk about this idea of unpacking, seeing how much you can get out of just a simple place, and how complicated a relationship with a single place can be. And once I get going, I just find it fascinating. But there's another reason for this, and that is that I, as I've said a little bit in the talk, I don't actually spend a lot of my time taking photographs. You know.
And me neither.
Yeah, okay. So the question is then, if you're a painter, for instance, you can get up in the morning, go into the studio and paint.
Yeah.
If you're a landscape photographer, there are 200 days of the year where you can't photograph because maybe the weather conditions aren't right, and so on and so forth, or whatever. Or you've got a teaching job, but you have to earn some money. So the question is then, well, what do I do on what I call the downtime, when I'm not photographing? Well, the answer is I'm thinking about the photographs that I've made, and I love the idea of building connections between the pictures, and it's just intellectually a really fascinating process. And so I've just developed this way of just building, as I said, these large studies through just slowly accruing. But a lot of the time it's because you're not thinking about these things when you're taking the pictures, but what happens afterwards and how rich that is.
Another thing that occurs to me is that time is the hidden theme in all photography, but it's very much comes to the fore in a lot of your pieces. I mean, specifically the rock slide piece, but in other pieces as well, and even the garden series that you showed.
Well, that's absolutely.
That it's about the progress of time, and your idea develops as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It changes. I mean, it's changed. I mean, I've been photographing rockfalls for kind of 20 years now, and so for instance, which I didn't talk about here, I realised that one of the things that was driving me in my early years of photographing the rockfalls, very bizarrely this, was the fears of being a father. I'd just become a father for the first time. One's anxious about what's going to happen to one's kids, about fate. So those pictures are a lot to do with fate. The fact that something can just happen and throw your whole life up onto kilter. And so but my kids are grown up now, and I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about other things. So now it's to do with the way that this link between Normandy and Sussex, and how deep history is actually not that deep. So it just goes on. The ideas just keep unraveling, unrolling.
So you talked about how imagery influenced the way that you made series. How that quite often imagery, you even mentioned Thomas the Tank Engine, are seeds and
they're embedded in our minds.
And I totally agree with that. And the problem with photography when it's a single image is it's very difficult to convey that meaning in a single image. It's not like a single image is not like a piece of prose. It's much more like a poem, and you refer to poetry quite a lot in your talk as well.
Yeah. Well, but you can in a single picture. I mean, one of the problems with photography is that we don't actually spend long enough looking at the pictures.
Yeah.
Because you're moving on to because they're so ubiquitous. One moves on to the next one.
We're encouraged to consume.
You consume. But for instance, if we think about, it's amazing how many pictures we've seen of this piece of shoreline in Iceland.
Yeah.
But if you or Egg these places are appearing. I mean, that picture of Raphael's of the surf coming in and out,
fantastic,
unbelievable shot. God, I wish I could make pictures like that.
The emotion in that was intense, wasn't it?
So, but if you start thinking about what's going on there, these sort of weird patterns going forward, sea coming thing, behind the cliffs, that's all and someone talked about why we're so fascinated by storms and the sublime. That was Paul, wasn't it? It's all there in a single picture, but it's actually giving it the time to allow it to kind of emerge.
It's there, but it's not spelt out, and that's why you need the time.
Yeah, but also that's why by making a series of pictures, linked pictures, you can draw that out and show more, and also because I always put text with work.
Yeah. No, the series is a fantastically powerful thing, and in the art world, it's much more recognised than it is in what I would describe as the general landscape of landscape photography, where the masterpiece is the notion.
Yeah. But we've moved. I mean, when I was growing up, and one bought books by Minor White and Ansel Adams, which were just those
monograph.
Yeah, the monographs.
Yeah.
But since the 1970s, 80s, and I think it's partly to do with the growth of photography in education, because we are taught to work on. Students are taught to work on projects.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do with the way, again, that's culturally framing, the way that people make studies, because you can get deeper into kind of a visual and intellectual engagement with an idea or a place or something through a series of pictures. So a lot of education, a lot of it's to do with the way that education is framed and shaped. Certainly when I was working at London College of Printing, one wasn't thinking like this.
I think when I was, I did my degree in the early 80s, and in fact when I was at college I was doing documentary photography. And documentary photography.
Well, that is storytelling.
It's storytelling, and it's always a series. But I think landscape photography as a genre, we've talked about the fact that it's a very broad church, but I think there is there's a big bias for making the individual masterpiece, which I think is inherited from the American tradition.
It is. But you see, another reason why, and this might, some people find this sort of quite disingenuous when I talk about it, but I really mean it. Another reason why I go down this line is that I'm not that confident as a picture maker.
Right.
So I don't believe, I've taught lots of photographers who can make bloody sight better pictures than me. Sorry about the swearing. Much better pictures than me, And so one of the ways of compensating with that is to make series, because then so that the individual pictures on their own are supported by the set. I'm not saying I would like to be able to just make the single masterpieces, but it partly comes from a sense of knowing that I'm never going to be Minor White, I'm never going to be Paul Strand. I wish Paul Strand worked in series, of course, didn't he, with his books and so on. So there are some models of that. Yeah. In that.
Well, and Ansel did portfolios, and he did bodies of work, which were. So I don't think that they, as individual artists, maybe generated that. There's a perception of that's what they did, because single pictures are presented, like in Ansel Adams' case. Clearing Winter Storm is, so there's a pressure almost to do that. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about that I thought was fascinating is the aesthetic of them compared to what you might describe as mainstream landscape photography. So they are, in my interpretation, that they're meditations, that they're quiet photographs. Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Well, there are a number of things about that. We talked about colour today. Your talk on colour and muted colour. Yeah. I mean, as soon as I started working in colour in 1980, and I'd been making pictures before that in colour, but seriously working. And one of the things that's interesting about the art market, that part of which that I belong to, is that artists basically have to work against the norms. So there's no point, if you're an artist, you don't want to make pictures that look anything like commercial work. You don't want it to look like advertising. Because you're not as good as advertising photographers. You have to make it look different. And so my generation, I've been really interested in exploring right the way from the beginning, which I didn't really talk about, but one of the major things that I've been interested in exploring about is what you can say with the language of colour within photography that's new, exploring different forms of different responses. And so by going out, again, I don't know, I think it was David Clapp was saying one of the ways to actually make pictures, I mean, I have very little to do, nice talk that he gave, very little to do with where he's coming from at all.
The
commercial work and pounds and so on. But one thing he said that was very simple is that if you do things that are different, if you put a camera somewhere different, if you do things that are different from other people, your pictures will look different. So I deliberately go out and make pictures, one of places that a lot of people don't pay any attention to, and secondly in conditions that most people wouldn't photograph in. Because I'm interested in just what happens.
Yeah, well, that's something that fascinates me. But I like to make pictures that I think are meditations, but mine are much more reductionist than yours. Yours have an incredible complexity.
Well, but I suppose that's because, I like that's, as I said, that's coming from that conversation partly with that guy. But it's a visual complexity, but also a conceptual complexity, I hope. But going back to the other point you were raising about the aesthetics, going back to my very first point about my disagreement with Raphael, is that I am just absolutely fascinated by this idea of putting a piece of emulsion in a box and sticking it somewhere and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in manipulating. I wouldn't want to be a Paul Gallagher personally and put all these filters. I'm not interested in that personally. I just want to see what happens when I put this box, the material world, light, comes in. I'm fascinated by what happens. So I deliberately I under-pictorialize the pictures.
Yeah.
I stick cameras in place. I think this is interesting. I'm just going to try and, obviously there is you are organising the picture, you're looking at framing.
There's a mediation because
There's mediation, but I like the idea of making pictures that are quite blunt. That's what you're interested in. Stick a camera at it and look at it and allow the photographic process to be what's interesting rather than the control that you bring to it.
So they have much more a documentary feel.
Yeah, well, it's documentary, but it's also philosophic. It's about how the medium operates, what it does.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to, well, you are trying to control it to a certain extent, but as little as possible, just to try and sort of let the medium do what it does. And if you do it enough, and in enough situations, interesting things start happening. Anyway, I don't know if that's partly an answer to that.
Oh no, I think it is. I think it is. I think we've reached the end of our time on this.
Okay,
now,
but what a shame.
Yeah, well, it was a fascinating discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
James.
thank you,
So,
David.
please join us again tomorrow morning for the rest of our streaming from the Meeting of Minds, and good night for now.
Bye-bye.